I believe we have questions starting with Congressman Saccone, then Representative Dowling. Any gentleman to my right? Well, we'll start with those two.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony and what you do out in our society. I appreciate that. Of course, there is a profound effect whenever a family unit breaks down, and that's why it's so important for us to promote family values, which our culture does not promote right now. I'm a grandparent, and I can tell you that there is nothing I wouldn't do for my two grandchildren. Nothing. And I'm sure my wife feels the same way, and I'm sure most of the grandparents in this room feel the same way. So, but what would you say to, my constituents who would say, look, that's a family responsibility. When you have something happens to the parents, the grandparents step in and putting aside legislative remedies like recognizing them as parents, I'm all for that. We could do that. But what about the constituents that would say, look, it's not the taxpayer, it's not the rest of us responsibility to pay for that. It's the family's responsibility to take away when they've had a family crisis, to take responsibility for those actions and step up and do that. It's not for the taxpayers themselves to step up and pay for that necessarily. That's the church's responsibility. That's the family's responsibility. That's we got private organizations. What would you say to those constituents that might say that?
In our opinion, it is the program that I'm referring to really does operate on a sliding fee scale. So for those families and grandfamilies that find themselves at the poverty level, and then they have an influx of 3 to 5 additional children, I would submit to you that they do in fact need some financial assistance. So those at the higher end of the economic spectrum would not necessarily be receiving this type of support that I mentioned, but it's still critically important that in my testimony that all of us collaborate together, because we can, as a community, also bring particular expertise to family members who are older because of the work that we do in the community. And the support groups are something that we're already in the process of developing more specifically to deal with this particular crisis because of the amount of people that are affected in that. So I'm not necessarily requesting any additional money. What I see, to your point, Representative, is that it is more of all of us individually as entities working together in a more collaborative fashion to be able to help assist families, individuals that are addicted, the entire population that's affected. That would be my comment. Anyone else?
I think that makes a lot of sense from a certain standpoint. From another standpoint, there are a lot of parishioners that are a lot older than my parents who are raising their grandchildren, and obviously they don't have the financial means and they don't have anyone else in their family to do it. So yes, the responsibility is falling on them, but then how can we provide them support if it's not financially? That has to be a piece of it. Because, a lot of these more elderly, they can't drive, they can't do anything for the people the children that they're not now taking care of. And so realistically, I'm not really sure how they would do it if we did not provide them with some kind of financial support.
If I could add to that, I would agree with you, Representative, that this is it's a family responsibility, but it's also the responsibility of the churches. It's also the responsibility of the communities. We heard testimony earlier about that it takes a village, and it truly does. We heard repeatedly this summer people expressing, as I mentioned earlier, the difficulty of accessing services, of even knowing where to turn. People have to have they have to carry it through, but they have to have the support and the direction and the knowledge of what to do, where to go, how to access services. Those kinds of activities are a critical component of this. Otherwise, our experience is that people are hanging out there, despairing with no place to go and nothing to do, no place to turn.
And that's part of what you do, right? You give them
Yes.
that kind
Yes,
of knowledge of where to
Yes.
turn.
That's what-
the churches
Absolutely.
step in, and
Yeah.
we want to promote more of that. That was my point. Okay, thank you very much.
I first, I guess, maybe an acknowledgement or a